Hello, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Megan McDonough, the CEO of Whole Being Institute, and I am also your host for the session today and actually all of the sessions to come in this course called Cultivating a Character Strengths Focus. So we were going through and getting started asking some questions about what you're looking forward to today, and I'm happy, very happy to say, go ahead and let's get started with today's call. So today on the docket is your professional strength building toolbox. And the session today is actually really the foundational cue for all of the courses to come. I see you as on the leading edge of creating positive change. And to be able to delve into the toolbox and pull out what you need to support one another and to support your clients, your students, the people that you manage, the organizations that you lead, really takes a rich understanding of, in-depth, what do those tools have that you can offer to others. So thank you for your work in your world, and I'm thrilled today to be introducing Ryan to you and handing the reins over to him to teach us about what are some of the in-depth tools that we can use in VIA. So let me share with you a little bit about Ryan Nemec. If there's anybody that could teach us about character strengths, it's Ryan. So Ryan is the VIA's educational director. He is a PhD and the author of several books, including Mindfulness and Character Strengths, a practical guide to flourishing. Ryan's also a licensed psychologist, a certified coach, and international workshop leader as well. He develops VIA's courses, reports, and programs and applies strengths at the centerpiece of character strengths coaching. He has a weekly blog called What Matters Most, and it can be found on Psychology Today. So welcome, Ryan. If you want to unmute yourself and also turn on your cam, we can turn the reins over to you for today's program.
Thank you so much, Megan. Wonderful introduction. It's such a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. And I've been really particularly looking forward to this presentation because it really marks the beginning of a collaboration between the VIA Institute on Character and Whole Being Institute. And as the chairman of the VIA Institute, Neil Mayerson, often says, it's really a wonderful thing when two organizations can really link arms with one another and really serve a common purpose. And really this purpose here is about bringing strengths to the world. It's about helping people to create greater well-being in their lives and in the lives of their clients and their students, their employees, and in the organizations that they serve. So it's very exciting to be here with all of you. And a great warm welcome also to those of you listening to the recording of this particular session, which might be many months from now. And so let's take a look at what we'll be focusing on today in the session here. We'll start with just a quick review of what is VIA and what are character strengths. We could certainly spend many, many hours on that topic, but we'll do a little snapshot view. And then we're going to look more specifically at a key tool in the world of character strengths. And one of the key tools is the VIA Pro Report. So we'll go in depth into some of the graphs and the report and how to use the report with clients. We'll even talk about some traps that practitioners can get in and when they're working with students and clients and employees. And then I really want to help you to understand how to set up a consultant site on the VIA Institute website where you can then manage reports of your clients in bulk amounts of people. And then we'll go through some other resources that'll be helpful for you in your work with character strengths. And we'll be fielding questions all along. So if any questions come up, feel free to throw them in the chat there, and we'll be fielding those at the end here. And any questions, by the way, that don't get answered in today's live webinar, I'll be happy to answer them either directly through email with you or in the main virtual classroom. We'll have a space to be able to answer questions for you. So I'll look forward to that as well. So let's go ahead and start with what is VIA. And so oftentimes when people think about VIA or they hear about VIA, they think about it in at least one of three ways. And so one way is that VIA stands for the organization, the nonprofit organization that's in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's called the VIA Institute on Character, formerly known as the Values and Action Institute. And so the VIA Institute's mission is to bring strengths to the world. And we emphasize our work as really advancing the science and practice with character strengths. So it's really our job to understand what is the latest research saying about character strengths. What are the different research camps around the world doing with character strengths in the world of organizations and in schools and in clinics and coaching sessions and so on? So what are these leading researchers doing and finding? And also, what are leading practitioners in the world of character strengths doing and finding? Since this work has been around for about 10 years now, since the VIA classification was sort of finalized, practitioners have been doing all sorts of wonderful work with character strengths. And so we try to understand what that work is that they're doing and try to distill that to other people. So we try to bring forth practice nuggets and ideas and strategies and ways to integrate it in with your work. So that we'll be doing some of that today. When people think of VIA, they often think of this VIA classification. And so that's the classification created by Marty Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology, and Chris Peterson, who is a really well-known and award-winning researcher at the University of Michigan, and their leadership of 55 renowned scientists. And the work of Peterson and Seligman and these scientists was to investigate what is best about human beings. What are those ingredients that are common within human beings and that bring forth goodness to oneself and to others? And so this 3-year project that involved a whole lot of groundbreaking work really led to this classification of 6 virtues and 24 strengths, which actually I'll give you a little quick peek at it right here. So this is what we think of as the VIA classification of strengths, and I'll come back to that slide in a moment. But also when people think of VIA, they also might think of the VIA survey, also called the VIA Inventory of Strengths, the VIA IS. And so the VIA survey is the online character strengths measure that measures these 24 character strengths, and now has been taken by something like 2.6 million people, reaching every country around the world. And the VIA survey is free and has always been free. So people go to the VIA-character.org website, they take the VIA survey, and then you get immediate free results of your rank order of character strengths from your highest to lowest, 1 to 24, with definitions for each. And then people begin to work with that and apply it and think about it more in greater depth. And so that's a little bit on the VIA survey. It's a measure of strengths that's also psychometrically valid, which means that it passes the test that psychologists use to determine whether a test is good or not. So it's not just this random compilation of questions. And so those tests are that the test is reliable, so it's repeatable over time. You'll get similar results over time, and is valid. So it's measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. What's interesting about this work is that these strengths have been found around the world in some of the most remote areas on the planet. These character strengths are found, and in the early days, the early VIA scientists went to some of those most remote areas. So far off in Africa, talking with Maasai tribal people, and up in northern Greenland, speaking with the Inuit people, and across many countries, and finding that these character strengths are universal. They are common ingredients across countries, across cultures. So that's what's really exciting about this work. Is never before have we had such a classification of human goodness, or a positive personality, if you will. And as you look at this VIA classification here, you see the 6 virtues on the left. These are the 6 virtues found across all the great all the world religions, the great philosophers, the great thinkers throughout time. And then there's the 24 character strengths that nest under each virtue. And one of the things I really like about this classification, and really when I fell in love with the classification back when it came out in 2004, is just how holistic it is. And I know that's another common link between Whole Being Institute and the VIA Institute, is focusing on the whole human being. And that's one of the things I really love about the VIA classification, because you can look at wisdom and you see these are the more cognitive strengths, the thinking-oriented strengths, strengths that are really head-driven or mind-driven. And then you have the courage strengths, which are kind of like gut-oriented strengths. We really dig deep to bring forth our perseverance and our bravery and our enthusiasm for life. Humanity are these strengths that really deal with relationships, especially one-on-one relationships, when we're tending and befriending and connecting with other people. And then justice-oriented strengths really deal with us connecting with our community. So we think of them often as civic-oriented strengths. And then transcendent strengths are seen as sort of spiritual strengths, helping us connect outside of ourselves. And then finally, you have temperance strengths. And these are strengths that really are about self-control and managing ourselves better. And they really help to protect us from our vices. You know, sometimes people talk about the 7 deadly sins. And so these are some of those character strengths that can help us to balance ourselves when we might be overdoing something. So that holistic nature is something I've always liked about the classification. Now, what you see here on the slide here, this is part of your virtual classroom. So everyone is welcome to download this and print this for your clients. I would encourage you to use it with all of your clients. I find in your workshops and so on, I found it to be this page here to be absolutely invaluable in workshops that I lead. And almost in any workshop I do, I always have every single participant have this. And often what I'll do is we'll do an early exercise to get people warmed up to positive psychology and to character strength. And I'll have students or clients come together in groups of 2 or 3, in which each person will share a good experience to happen to them in the last week or 2. And then the other person or persons are listening to the story. And they have this handout, this page right here in front of them. And they practice spotting strengths, looking for strengths in the story. And strength spotting is such a key building block for this character strengths work. And it's really an ideal first step with doing strengths work, really for yourself or for your clients. So this sheet really I find to be quite a good match for that. And by the way, on the VIA site, we have a more youth-friendly version of this that has youth-oriented pictures, which you can also download for free on the VIA site. You can easily find that under the classification tab. Now, before we move into some more of the specific practical tools, one thing that's important to set up at the beginning is, well, why are we even talking about this? Why strengths? Why are strengths relevant or important? And I have many, many, many reasons that I could give you. I'm just going to focus a little bit more on some of the outcomes of why. We could certainly go into how we're wired for the bad. Our brains are wired to focus on what's wrong, how we need strengths to balance things, how we have a whole lot of pervasive strength blindness within us, how our clients come at things with a very negative approach to things. There's many, many reasons, but let me just share with you some of the research here. And all of these are research-based outcomes of doing strengths work. So those people who focus on strengths, and specifically character strengths, manage their stress. Character strengths are linked with a number of different health behaviors, higher self-acceptance, greater well-being, better engagement, better productivity, better workplace happiness, and on and on. One particular study that was particularly interesting is where you see the rectangle in your screen there that says 4 or more is best. And there was a study in the workplace that was done a couple years ago that looked at individuals who used 4 or more of their highest strengths. So those strengths, we'll say that were in their top 7 was the cutoff. 4 or more of those, and those employees who used 4 or more of those highest strengths, or we could call them signature strengths, those people had more positive experiences at work and had more experiences where their work was a calling in their life. The work was just very meaningful to them and really an extension of who they are. And it really doesn't matter what the person's job was, but that whatever that job was, if they're using their highest strengths, and in this case, at least 4 of them regularly, that was linked with more calling experiences in life. So very interesting that there was kind of that cutoff there, rather than 3 strengths or 2 strengths or 1 strength. So the idea here is to try to use many of our strengths and to really express ourselves and who we are as much as possible in our life. And certainly the work domain is one of the big areas of our life. Now let me ask you to do a little experiment here for me. Take a look at this slide here and tell me what you see. Okay, so if I'm kind of tuning in to the vibe of people, some people often will say it looks like a mountain, it looks like a reflection in the water. One person is kind of interpreting it looks like a turtle. Sometimes I do hear a reptile theme often, crocodile, stony creature. Sometimes people say that it looks like a dreary image, like it's dark and raining and there's a thunderstorm. You know, all sorts of different things. Native American actually is something that sometimes people say, just a peaceful lake, all sorts of things like that. Now what I want to invite you to do is to turn your head, tilt your head to the left. So allow your left ear to make contact with your left shoulder, or at least in that direction. And now what do you see? So perhaps now, when you tilt your head to the left, you can see almost like a couple people emerging from the image. You can see perhaps a face there on the left side. And then you can see in the middle, if you're using the mountain part and the reflection part, in the middle you can see another person's head perhaps. And you can see the hands clasped together in front of them. So it does look like, some people say it's a mother and child praying, or some people say it's a Buddha image, or some people say it's a male figure with a smaller figure, things like that. But so the idea here is that there's always more to the picture. There's always something that we're not completely seeing. And that's the case when it comes to strengths, because we have so much strength blindness, so much that we're not seeing, that we often have to do something different. We have to make a behavioral change to really begin to notice and look beyond the surface of things. And if we just tilt our head with the person that we're with, or with our family member, or even with ourselves, we make a behavioral change, tilting our head and looking at things from a different angle, then things begin to emerge. And suddenly, the picture changes completely. And we see a person from a completely different angle. Not that our other view was wrong, or that we can't still incorporate our other view, but it's important to also have the new view, a new perception that we can integrate in, so that we're always taking what some researchers call a growth mindset, where we're looking for the new and looking for opportunities, looking for growth. Or some people in the mindfulness world call it beginner's mind, which is seeing things as if we're seeing them for the very first time. So when we tilt our head and look at a person in a little bit of a different way, that's cultivating a sense of beginner's mind and seeing them new, seeing them fresh. It changes our perspective. And this kind of shift is particularly important for not only us as practitioners helping people, but also for our clients. So if we as the practitioner can shift toward looking for strengths, spotting strengths, talking about strengths, using our own strengths, that's going to be connected with helping ourselves feel more energized. If we're using our strengths in a coaching session or in a business meeting or with our students, then we're going to feel more comfortable, more energized, more lively, more excited, probably happier, and so on. And that, of course, that energy would rub off on our clients. But also research shows that if we spend time thinking about our client's strengths, even before a session, this is called resource priming, that when we do that kind of activity, thinking about a client's strengths, for a few minutes before a session, that's actually linked with the client activating their strengths more in the session. It's linked with better client outcomes. It's linked with a better therapeutic relationship when therapists have done this with their clients. And if there's one thing that we know about working with people is that the relationship is key. Whether you're a coach or a manager or a counselor and so on, relationship is key. And so this thinking about strengths, looking at a person from a different angle, if that can impact the relationship, then probably all of us are listening more closely. All of us are interested then. And also when we do this thing called resource priming, thinking about strengths before a session, it also boosts the mastery experiences for the client. So a sense of accomplishment, sense of self-efficacy for what it is that they're focusing on. So we can really kind of keep this image here in mind as we move forward in terms of taking a strength-based approach and looking at people in a little bit of a different way. And so what we're going to do as we move into the VIA Pro report, we're going to think about taking a strength-based approach from this strength-based model. This sort of sets the stage in a general way for how we can work with people's strengths. And so this is a very simple model for working with strengths. And regardless of the approach that you take with people, if you already take a bit of a strength-based approach, if you are working as a cognitive behavioral therapist, or you work with the GROW model as a coach, or other kinds of models, this Aware, Explore, Apply approach really can act as an overlay for whatever you're doing. Because it's just a very general way of thinking about, where am I at with working with this client's strengths? Are we busy trying to cultivate some awareness, some strength awareness, and taking the VIA survey and helping the client to kind of link strengths with themselves and to link strengths with why they're here to meet with me? So are we cultivating awareness of strengths, helping them to take a bit of a shift to themselves and tilt their head? Or maybe we're more at an explore phase where we've generated some awareness and now we're digging deep. Now I'm asking them questions about how they've used their strengths in the past, or how they might use them more in the future, or looking at more specific strengths of their life. And so we're really trying to dig in and explore who they are. Or maybe I've done some strengths awareness and strengths exploration, and I'm ready to set some goals. I'm ready to help the clients set some goals and take some action. So this becomes sort of an overlay for thinking about our strength-based approaches. And so we're going to take this line of thinking with us as we move here into looking at the VIA Pro report. And what I'll do here is give a brief overview of the report, and then we'll go through each of the different graphs and ways to think about the graphs on working with people. So the VIA Pro report is a report that is personalized. It was actually developed for professionals. So it's a personalized, individualized report on that person's highest strengths. And it's really the ideal character strengths tool for professionals working with clients. And I use those terms loosely. If it's a manager working with employees, if it's a therapist working with clients, if it's a coach working with clients, even in teachers working with, say, undergraduate students or graduate students. We think of this as one of the best practices, or a best practice for working with strengths, for reviewing strengths, because it really helps the individual to advance their strengths knowledge and to explore their strengths in a deeper way. So really it helps people to move them through aware, explore, apply. And we always encourage people to remind themselves that this report is really broad brushstrokes. It's kind of general ways of exploring the client's strengths. And we don't want to make too much of every little number, and because these are just starting points for conversations, rather than getting too focused on any one particular detail. We want them all to kind of just help move the conversation forward. One time I'll do, when I'm doing live workshops, I'll break practitioners up into groups of 2 and have them use the VIA Pro report with one another. So I'll say, well, okay, for the next few minutes, I'd like you to exchange VIA Pro reports and spend time getting to know this person. First, take a look through the report and just familiarize yourself with this person through the report. And then after sort of a 5 to 10 minutes of that, then let's encourage you to have a conversation. And each person will take about 10 minutes to talk with the person using the VIA Pro report to talk with them. So looking at the graphs, helping the person to, almost like you're counseling or coaching the person through the report, talking with them through the signature strengths graph and the other graphs, and identifying strengths and thinking about strengths. And I can think back to a recent time when there was 2 coaches that I had paired together, and they'd never met before. They didn't know one another, and they spent about 20 minutes total reviewing one another's reports with them in this way, so about 10 minutes each. And after this review, one of the coaches said, I asked for feedback, and one of them said, I can tell that 10 minutes with this particular report with my coaching clients is going to really equal about 2 to 3 sessions of work with them, because that's how quickly I got to know this person, and that's how quickly we moved into greater depth. And then the other person responded and said, yeah, I totally agree. And she said, and for me, it felt as if I really knew this person really well. I felt as if they knew me and that I really knew them. So that really speaks to the relationship building aspect that happens with this kind of report. And those are really common sentiments that we always hear when we do that kind of exercise. Now, you can see at the bottom there, as being part of this particular webinar, and after you set up your consultant site, which is free on the VIA site, you'll be able to receive a free VIA Pro report. And so more details on that later, but that's just kind of another benefit of this particular webinar. So now I'm going to go through the different graphs in this report, and some of the examples, I'll give you some client examples to help kind of give insights into some of the graphs here. So this is one of the first graphs here. This is a snapshot of the individual's signature strengths, or in the case of it's your report, your signature strengths. And signature strengths really are the key aspect of this report. And that's really the emphasis of this particular report, and is what we really believe to be the most important aspect of all of this character strength science that has come about. There's been all sorts of wonderful outcomes and great research coming out and still coming out. I mean, it's literally coming out from around the world every month. But probably the most important piece is this area of signature strengths. And signature strengths are those strengths that are most essential to who you are. They're most core to who you are. And as a starting point for identifying signature strengths, you can take a look at this graph. We're going to talk about some other ways to identify signature strengths at the next graph, but this is a starting point. So it gives you a snapshot, a sense of who this person is and what this person really values most about themselves, and perhaps how they express themselves most in this world, or at least could express themselves most in this world. And probably many of you know some of the studies on signature strengths, that in double-blind, placebo, randomized controlled trials, signature strengths, exercises around signature strengths are linked with greater happiness and decreased depression for these effects lasting as long as 6 months. And so that's something that's really exciting. And the intervention that's often done is for the individual to choose one of their signature strengths. and then use that strength in a new way each day. So whether you're a student, a young person, a youth, or whether you're an employee, or whether you're a practitioner, whatever you are, choose one of your signature strengths and use it in a new way each day. Really expand upon it. Think about it more broadly. Find different unique ways to specifically use it. And that exercise, actually, that intervention has been replicated in studies across different countries. And researchers are then advancing the work and beginning to look at, well, why is it that working on signature strengths is successful? Why is it connected with well-being? And they're finding all sorts of different things, that it's connected with your passion in life. It's connected with meeting your basic psychological needs. Tapping into signature strengths is connected with reaching your goals, and so on. So there's lots of reasons that researchers are now finding, and there's still more work to be done, but lots of reasons of why this is important and why it's linked with well-being. Now, if we move on, so a big portion of this VIA Pro report focuses on helping the individual, the user, to build more awareness of their signature strengths. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner, you can see where we are in the Aware, Explore, Apply model. So you'll see for each of the signature strengths that's reported on, there's many different categories of analysis in which the user can review and look at and learn more about and cultivate more awareness for themselves. So there's tips on how other people see them in terms of strengths. There's some of the research findings on a specific strength. There are different ways to explore the strength with questions. There are strategies around and concepts around overuse and underuse. What happens when you're bringing this character strength forth too strongly? What might that look like? And how could it maybe get you in trouble if you bring forth your love of learning too strongly? Maybe you come across as a know-it-all, for example, or maybe it turns other people off because you're always spouting out facts. That might be one example of overusing this particular signature strength, because we can overuse any of the 24. And then what would underuse look like? Because we can still underuse our best strengths because there's so much that we're blind to within ourselves, so much more potential we could cultivate. That means there's still a level of blindness with even our best qualities. So we can still tap into how we might be underusing our strengths, and what are some novel ways or new ways, as the research suggests, to use those signature strengths. So this report then goes through each of your strengths in that way. And oftentimes what I do with these sections, and so it ends up being, 10 or 12 pages or something, oftentimes I'll give that section of the report as homework for clients to do, where I'll ask them, okay, read pages 10 to 22 or whatever the pages are specifically. And while you're reading these before our next meeting, jot down the questions that come up for you, and jot down also the insights that you'd like us to continue to pursue in our coaching or in our counseling work. And also consider if any activities come about as you read these pages about your signature strengths. See if something strikes you about an activity that you might want to incorporate into your daily life. So that's a way that I use these sections of the report. And then if you keep turning the pages in the VIA Pro report, you come across this graph. It's basically the character strengths in rank order graph. And this is probably the graph that I tend to use the most with clients, in all honesty. I like all of them to different degrees, but this one I like using this right in the first session, and I like helping the client to identify and really confirm their signature strengths. So as I said before, the top 5, top 6, top 7 might be the individual signature strengths, and we at the VIA Institute find that that's a pretty good marker for whether it's a signature strength or not, if it's in people's top 5 or 7, but it's not perfect. And so we always want to then ask the client's view of themselves and as they learn about these strengths. So first of all, I try to see if there's any clarification that clients need about any of the words. A lot of these words are pretty self-explanatory. Everyone knows what love means and bravery means and so on. But some of the words might need a little explanation. The word judgment sometimes brings up questions to people, and I explain that as well. That's about critical thinking. It's about being very rational-minded and analytical and looking at the many details of a situation. Some people might ask about, well, prudence. Is prudence really a strength? And then I say, of course, absolutely. Prudence is all about being very cautious and conscientious. These are people who are often very responsible and very much on time. They're people that are very good at setting goals, so they're good at setting short-term goals and long-term goals. People might ask questions about self-regulation, and so self-regulation or self-control is about managing your emotions, managing your impulses, managing things in regard to health behaviors like diet and exercise, and sticking with things, living a lot of discipline in one's life, and so on. So we might need some clarification of words. And then I ask individuals to look at those strengths that come up toward the top and invite them to consider whether they're signature or not. So are they core to who you are? Is this, in other words, the real you as you look at these particular strengths? And so we can look at the highest strengths, and often I'll invite individuals to look beyond the top 5. So look into your top 7, top 10 to see if some other strengths you find to be essential to who you are. And are there any strengths that you question that are in your top 5 that you don't understand or don't think are part of you? And then have a dialogue about that. Now, we can also identify signature strengths through more of a quantitative method, where we look at what strengths separate themselves by 0.5 or more. And so we find in general, and again, this is in general, broad brushstrokes here. We don't want to be too literal about this, but in general, that if strengths separate themselves from one another by 0.5, that's somewhat likely to be a meaningful difference between strengths. And if they separate themselves by 1.0, then that's very likely to be a meaningful difference between strengths. So for example, for this particular client, you can see her love of learning is at about 4.5. And her, you move down a little bit and you see her leadership is at about 3.5, teamwork 3.5, forgiveness 3.5. So that's a difference of 1.0 or more. And so that's very likely that her love of learning is quite different and relevant and important for her, much more likely to be signature than leadership, teamwork, forgiveness, and all the way down. And those that separate by about 0.5, so love of learning versus, say, her fairness, it's about a 0.6 or 7 difference. Curiosity, that's somewhat likely to be a meaningful difference between strengths. So you can use this kind of method to be able to determine what really might be a signature strength for this particular client. Now, you can add some additional approaches. So you can also identify signature strengths by asking key questions about each strength. And the most important question to ask is, and the most important criterion of a signature strength is the strength essential to who you are? In other words, is it really core to who you are? Is it the real you? So that word essential is really essential. And so that's the most important. So is love of learning essential to who you are? Is humor essential to who you are? Honesty, and so on. You can add other questions that aren't as important as that question, but are still relevant. So questions like, is humor energizing for you? Is honesty identified by your family and friends? Do you use your fairness strength across many different settings? Is your curiosity or your humility, your modesty, are these very easy for you to use, very natural? They just sort of emerge from you without even trying. So these are other questions that get at signatureness that you might use with clients as well. Now, sometimes client reports, and this isn't all that rare, but sometimes client reports have many strengths that really don't separate themselves by 0.5 or more. And so there's not much difference between the different strengths in terms of those raw scores. And so then it becomes more difficult, to identify signature strengths. You really need the coaching type approach to really question and to ask the individual about themselves and practice strength spotting and just observing strengths over time. One way that you might approach that as well, additional way, is to really put strength versus strength. And so if the client's really torn between a couple strengths that are tied and whether it's signature for them or not, just put the strengths together, and as if they're kind of going in a head-to-head battle, if you will. For you, is your modesty more core to who you are, or is your leadership? Is your leadership more core to who you are, or your teamwork, and so on? I can think of a recent example where this came to be. It actually was this particular client. And this particular client really identified those first 6 strengths, so from love of learning down to modesty, as essential to who she is. She could really understand those. We talked about them. They made sense to her. Sometimes it takes a little bit of dialogue, like strengths like humility, to really understand and to think about it applied to yourself. But this particular client did endorse all of those. And then so we said, well, let's keep looking. Are there other strengths that you really use a lot and that are real essential to who you are? And so she began to get a little torn with the next couple there of leadership and teamwork. And so I asked her that question. I said, well, if we put leadership and teamwork head-to-head together, which of these 2 strengths do you think is more core to who you are, more signature? And thinking about it from that lens, she began to think about her work environment. She said, well, I can see how I do use my leadership at work because I do organize a lot of activities, and I do that for my family as well and my friends. But I think teamwork is actually more core, more essential to who I am, because I am the one who always is wanting to bring everybody on board on the team. And I'm always the one trying to connect with other people and trying to build a good, strong team, and to really my role, well, not as a leader, but as a team player. And I really like to see myself as among a group of equals with my family and friends, and not necessarily as the leader. So I think that really drives me more, that particular strength. So then we ended up emphasizing that a little bit more in our work because it was a little bit more of a signature strength for her. So then we spent more time emphasizing that particular strength and helping her to understand it. Now, the next graph, if you're kind of following along in the VIA Pro report here, the next graph you would come upon is the core virtues graph. And so this is a graph where it gives you the broader picture in terms of looking at strengths. Where do these strengths nest? And they nest under these 6 core virtues. And one of the things that I like about this graph is that these are those words and those concepts, those virtues, that have been most valued throughout time by the great philosophers and thinkers and so on. So it's kind of amazing that you can then have this plotted for yourself across these great aspects of humanity. And so you can look at sort of the clustering of the strengths that go under these virtues and say, okay, so for this particular client, justice really is significant for this particular person, really meaningful, really important. So that just gives you another lens, another thing to explore, another thing to understand, another thing for the client to understand. And one way that I also use this graph, not only emphasizing that point that I just made, but also I do something like this. If you look on the right side of the screen now, an exercise like this, where it has the different domains of life. And I have the individual select their highest virtue, in this case it's justice, and think about how justice is expressed across the different domains. So first of all, I usually spend a moment or two asking the client, what does justice mean to you? I don't want to assume what that means. So what does that word mean to you? And I can tell you the way it lays out in the VIA verbiage. What does it mean to you? How is this relevant in your life? And then doing an exercise like this, where we say, let's take a couple minutes here, or maybe as homework, and jot down at least one example of how you have expressed justice in your community, in your work life or school life, and in your family, in your home. And this is just another way of exploring strengths, taking another lens of strengths, and expanding strengths, expanding the way that they think, the person thinks about their strengths. So this graph can be a catalyst for that. And then here's another virtues graph, but this graph gives you a peek at how the character strengths line up under each virtue now. And I often think of this graph as the pathways graph. This really is the graph that shows the different pathways to the virtues. So it's kind of interesting. If you look at the sort of the top color there of the yellowish orange color, which is the 5 wisdom strengths, then you can kind of think, at least again, one way of thinking about this is that love of learning for this client is a particular pathway to greater wisdom. For her, honesty is a particular pathway or strong pathway to greater courage. Humor is a great pathway for her to transcendence, to connecting outside of herself. So that's one way to begin to look at this for clients that maybe are trying to build a little bit more courage, and that's maybe one of their goals in their life, or they're trying to get more involved in their community and civic work, and you focus on the justice-oriented strengths, or maybe they need more self-control in their life, so you turn to the temperance strengths, and you look at which one of these strengths might be their best pathway. You know, because if this person's trying to cultivate greater wisdom, I'm going to have a lot more success probably in helping them to cultivate wisdom if I tap into their love of learning strength rather than tapping into their creativity. You know, this person doesn't see themselves very high in creativity. Not that they don't have it, because we have all 24 of these strengths, but she just doesn't see it and doesn't align herself with it as much. And it's not energizing as much for her to be creative. So we would want to rally what's most energizing to her, what's most productive for her, which would be her love of learning strength. And so we would then talk about, okay, how can you use your love of learning to cultivate greater wisdom? Maybe that would mean to turn to reading some of the great philosophy works, or maybe reading sites, websites that talk about wisdom, or maybe if she's really high in love of learning, maybe even research articles, who knows? But tapping into that craving that she has for learning is going to be a lot more successful than looking at any of the other strengths, for that matter, under that virtue category. Now, another way that you might look at this is to look at how the strengths within the virtue category support one another and how they can maybe be helpful in boosting one another. So, for example, when I asked this client what she wanted to work on, she said, well, I've been hearing that there's a lot of good stuff around gratitude these days, and people keeping gratitude journals and conducting gratitude visits. You know, I don't see myself as all that grateful, and she's right, it doesn't come up as high on her VIA survey as one of her best strengths. And so she said, I'd like to improve upon that. You know, what do you think might be useful? So we turned to this page in the VIA Pro report for her, and we said, well, let's look at the strengths within the transcendence virtue. Let's see if any of those strengths might be supportive to you, supportive to your gratitude. So we might start with your highest strength in that category, the strength of humor. You know, humor is something that you clearly endorse and that you see as a core part of you. You can very easily think of ways to be more funny or to use humor in your life. You're probably well practiced at it, whether you know it or not. I wonder if humor could be useful in boosting up your gratitude strength. And so I said, how might that be helpful to you? And she thought about it a little bit, and after a little bit of exchange, she said, well, I could really observe and write down 1 or 2 funny things that happened to me and why I'm grateful for those. You know, because I'm already doing funny things, I'm telling jokes to people, I'm laughing a lot, I'm smiling a lot, I'm being silly. So now I'm just going to bring some greater mindfulness to that particular strength. And I'm going to specifically infuse gratitude in there by expressing how I'm grateful for 1 or 2 funny things each day. And I'm going to write it down to kind of solidify it. And so that was the exercise that she did then for the next couple weeks before we met again. So she was using her signature strength to boost a lower strength. And I give that example specifically because many people will ask that question of how do you use your higher strengths to boost a lower strength? So that's an example there. Now, the last graph in the VIA Pro report is this one. It's called the Circumplex graph, or the 2-factor balance graph. You know, we can think of this as a way of finding balance within yourself and in your relationships. And so let me just briefly explain this graph. That this graph, first of all, the circles are just for aesthetic purposes. They don't necessarily mean anything. They just help you to kind of bring your vision to a point. And the dots that you see with the strengths, those are the same for everybody. So the dots don't move regardless of who's taking the survey. What's different is for each person is what's colored in. And what's colored in are the person's highest strengths, you know, or what we could see as a starting point for their signature strengths. So that's what's colored in. Now, it's important to also note that this was derived from a scientific procedure called factor analysis. So these dots then, the placement of the dots have some meaning in that sense. And the researchers looked at how the strengths clustered together. And there are two factors that were described then. One factor is the factor of interpersonal and intrapersonal. So strengths that we either express just within ourselves, we don't really need other people around to express them, intrapersonal, and strengths that we really use with other people. And those are strengths that are interpersonal. So the more high that a strength is on this particular graph, the more interpersonal it then is. So teamwork is clearly a very interpersonal strength. Humility is all about putting attention on somebody else. So it can be very interpersonal in how you relate to people. And then the other continuum is the left to right, or the east to west x-axis, if you will, which is the mind and heart factor. And so these are strengths as you go more and more to the left. These are strengths that are more mind-oriented, thinking-oriented, analytical-oriented, logic-oriented. So then the strengths like judgment, which is all about using your head and analyzing and thinking things. Prudence, very mind-oriented. And then as you go further and further to the right, you have the heart-oriented strengths. So strengths that are more emotional, sometimes intuitive, feeling-oriented strengths like love and gratitude and so on. And so that's a little description of the graph. And so this really, remember, this is all about starting conversations. It's all about exploring things with people. So this graph then allows you to then ask people about how they use these strengths with other people or when they're alone, how they use them in their mind and in their heart. So for example, a practical exercise that I often do is I have the client choose one of the colored in dots, so one of the signature strengths, and then we explore it from each quadrant. We explore it from each angle. So let's take love, for example. So that's one of the signature strengths that's colored in, and I would invite the individual to think about how they express love from the heart, from the mind, interpersonal, intrapersonal. So for example, they might say, well, from the mind, love isn't just a heart strength, it's also a mind strength. I can think from a loving perspective. I can have loving thoughts. I can write down, when I'm really caring about somebody, I can really literally write down 5 or 6 cognitions or thoughts that I'm having. So that's how love could be expressed from the mind and help me understand that better. Or, of course, you can look at it more from the heart and from the feeling level and maybe how you feel love in the body. Where do you actually feel it when you're really in love with someone or really just loving another person, being very warm and genuine with them? And then you can look at it intrapersonally. What does it look like to direct love to yourself? Oftentimes, that's a wake-up call for people with many of these strengths, like forgiveness, fairness, love, kindness in particular, those 4. What is it like to turn forgiveness inward intrapersonally and forgive yourself? What's it like to bring kindness inward, or in this case, love inward, and to love yourself more? You know, do you find that you do that very much? What would it look like? And then, of course, turning it outwardly, interpersonally. Please give me some examples of how you have expressed love in some of your relationships. How have you expressed it at work, by the way? And they might say, well, I've used it at work because I'm very warm with my colleagues. I always kind of try to respond to them with compassion, and I try to listen carefully, and that's how I'm using my love strength at work. So that's a way that you might help the person to begin to get some more insights and questions around their strengths balance. And then you can ask them from those kind of examples I just gave, you can then ask them, okay, now, what would be a balanced approach for you with love, with directing love inwardly and outwardly? Is there any adjustments that you need to make? Where are you strongest? That kind of thing. And then the last piece of the VIA Pro report that I'll go over is this on research-based exercises for each character strength. And so these are some of the best research-based approaches for each of the character strengths. Some of them have more science behind them than others because some strengths are, quite frankly, a lot more advanced in the study. So the study of creativity is further along than, say, the study of humility or the strength of of prudence, that kind of thing. So some of this is expert opinion when it's a strength that hasn't been studied as much, and some of it is from intervention studies. So it's a little resource for you to be able to use if you're looking for ideas to build up any of the 24 in particular. I'm going to briefly go through some practitioner traps that oftentimes people find themselves, 3 in particular, that they find themselves in when working with character strengths. One is actually a preoccupation with weakness, in the sense that many people will, and most people, when they get their VIA survey results, will actually go immediately to the bottom. And they'll say, oh, I just want to look at my weaknesses and to look at what I need to improve on. And, you know, I always try to help people understand that actually all 24 of these are strengths that you have. This test doesn't measure weaknesses. You know, there are plenty of tests out there that measure weaknesses. So this test actually measures your strengths, and those strengths that come up highest, those are the most core to who you are. And the ones that are come up lower are strengths that you maybe haven't developed or maybe haven't given much attention to, but there's still possibilities that you could develop. You know, when we focus quickly on weaknesses, and that's all we focus on, we're just doing what most people do, which is to take a deficit-based approach to things. We're just taking sort of a negative mindset and looking at what's wrong. Not that that's the worst thing in the world, but that's not quite positive psychology if we're just focusing on deficits or what we're lowest in. So an important piece then, an important takeaway is if somebody is really preoccupied with their lowest strengths, one approach that I take is first to try to educate them, like I just shared, about this, about how 24 are strengths, and then redirect them to their signature strengths. And if that's still not gaining much ground for them, or they're not getting it, or they're just too rooted in their lowest strengths, then I discuss with them, okay, well, fine, let's focus on one of these lower strengths, so kind of going with the flow, and say, well, let's look at how one of your signature strengths could boost a lower strength. And then you're working with their highest energy and their best qualities to boost one of their qualities that they'd like to strengthen. Okay, so that's one trap that we fall into. Another trap that we fall into is that as practitioners, we're very eager to quickly jump to goal setting, to quickly jump to, okay, well, what action are we going to take? You took the VIA survey? Okay, well, let's set up a goal plan now. What are we going to do? What's the intervention? And so we're skipping a phase. We're skipping the explore phase of the model. We're just starting to cultivate some awareness, and then we're not digging deep. We're not discussing. We're not spending much time with it. We're trying to go quickly to goals, and we do that sometimes because of our own discomfort with working with strengths or our lack of knowledge in working with strengths. We do it because our client is impatient and they want to quickly see results. We do it because we might want to quickly see results. Lots of reasons we might do that kind of thing. By the way, we certainly minimize the first phase as well of cultivating greater strengths awareness. So the idea here is to balance things out and to make sure that we're mindful of all 3 steps and that we do steps 1 and 2 thoroughly before we move into goal setting and action planning and sorts of things like that. Now, a third practitioner trap is individuals forgetting to celebrate and appreciate their character strengths. There's a whole new science that's going to be emerging and starting to emerge around strengths appreciation and there's benefits when individuals spot and appreciate strengths in one another, especially among couples. And often what happens among individuals is that they start to learn about the topics like overuse, and they kind of forget that signature strengths are really what's going to probably help them the most. And they immediately move on to, well, I just don't want to overuse my strengths anymore. I've heard that strengths can be dangerous or that they can cause me problems, and so I got to quickly manage that. You know, like this particular client, Karen, who came to me and said, I want to stop overusing my prudence and increase my weakness of bravery. So we did some clarification around how none of the strengths are weaknesses per se, at least according to how the VIA survey measures things. And then I had a dialogue with her about prudence. I said, okay, so you want to manage your overuse of prudence. Well, tell me a little bit about, first of all, how you use prudence. You know, you can't get to overuse if you're not using it first. So how do you use your prudence strength? And she couldn't give a single example of how she's used her prudence or how it's good for her, how it's helped her. So even though it came up in her top 5, and she answered the questions that way, and even though I could easily spot prudence in each of our conversations, she just wasn't able to see it. So she was quickly moving into a deficit-based approach of overuse, looking at what's wrong about her rather than looking at what was strongest in her and celebrating her prudence first and really understanding how she's used it. And as we dialogued about it more, she began to see that I've used prudence in all of the most important decisions of my life. I use it every day in being careful and cautious about how I care for my children and how I plan for the day and plan at work. And as we began to dialogue about it, suddenly her signature strength became more clear, and then she was able to celebrate it and appreciate it that much more. So those are some traps that we can get into when we're working with clients with strengths. Now, I want to go through setting up some ideas here with setting up your professional site. So from the VIA Pro report, now that you have a better understanding of the graphs and how to think about it and how to work with it, now we can begin to say, okay, how can I set this up for my clients working with the VIA Pro report? And so I'll go through some steps. As I go through these 6 steps, it almost seems like it's really complicated, but it's really painfully easy. But I just want to really go through it in a stepwise format so that you really understand it and it's really clear. So to set up your professional site to manage your reports, whether it's the VIA Pro report or other reports, you first go to the www.viacharacter.org site, our main site, and you register, or if you've already registered, you log in, and so that's the circled piece right there. And then step 2 here is you click to create your professional site. So if you haven't taken the VIA survey, you can take the VIA survey first and then do that. The next step then is to follow these steps of configuring your VIA Pro site, where you can create your own URL. You can set up purchasing the reports for your clients and really setting up your own link. And so you just follow these steps to configure your link. And then the next step is to give out the link to survey takers who will then register and use this right here as a way of thinking about how to do this. So you can see this is Kelly Aloise's professional site. So it might be, if your name is John Doe, it's John Doe's VIA professional site, and you can have your link be johndoe.viasurvey.org, and that's what you would give to your clients, and your clients would then see this here, John Doe or Kelly Aloise's VIA professional site, and that's when they would log in and take the survey. So it's all right under you, and it kind of really makes you very linked in with this VIA work. So the client sees nothing but a seamless approach here. And then what happens is after the client completes the VIA survey, you'll actually receive an email, and it's a notification that your client has completed the VIA survey. So then you can easily log back into your account, and then you can purchase reports. If you've already purchased reports, you can add credits to the clients. You'll see this when you log back in, and you would just click on the Clients tab, and you might have a list of 2 or 22 different clients that you can add reports credits to, and then very easily get you would download their report, and you could forward that PDF to your client or to your student or to your employee, etc., so that both of you can benefit from it. So that's a little on setting up your particular site. I want to go through a couple resources here now. I just want to remind everybody that there's only one VIA survey, but there's 3 reports that can be pulled from that VIA survey. And so one is the VIA Pro report that we've been talking about. Then there's a consumer report called the VIA Me report. And so this is more of a tip-friendly, quote-friendly, colorful, consumer-minded report. Not as in-depth. We don't have the in-depth graphs that the VIA Pro has, or the in-depth focus on overuse or signature strengths. but it's useful for just the everyday person sort of walking down the street. So it's less expensive, and then also from that same VIA survey, you can have a VIA team report where teams between 3 and 15 people, all of their VIA survey results are aggregated into a sort of a giant team report that's usually around 40 pages. And you can look at many different graphs and different angles of your team, the character strengths culture on the team, and the strengths that are highest and lowest in the team, and heart strengths and mind strengths, and how to work with the team members, and so on. So that's really a best practice for those of you that consult to teams. Now, we also have a VIA youth survey for people between the ages of 10 and 17. That's a briefer version and is validated. And all youth that take that VIA youth survey get their free results, just like everybody in the world. But youth or teachers or parents that want to purchase a deeper report for their youth or for their son or daughter or client can get the VIA youth report, which we call You Decoded, and it's a kid-friendly, colorful youth report. Other resources, the VIA Institute offers a number of online courses. Some are synchronous, some are asynchronous. You can see the layout here. If you just go to our resources tab on the viacharacter.org site, you'll see that we have specific courses on mindfulness that we conduct live, courses on deeper dive into character strengths, and a number of other free resources, actually, if you peruse that page. Something that's quite amazing to a lot of people is that we track all the latest research on character strengths, and there are over 200 recent peer-reviewed articles just in the last few years that we've summarized very briefly for you in like 2 or 3 sentences, and have the whole citation and APA reference right there if you need to locate the article. And all you have to do is go, again, to the VIA Character site. You can see the research tab there, and it's all broken down into character strengths at work, in education, with mindfulness, in general, character strengths, with health, and so on. Here are a few more websites you might track. I mentioned the VIA Character site a number of times. We have a YouTube channel with over 50 videos that we've either created or uploaded around character strengths. Some are professional documentaries on using strengths in organizations, corporations, in classrooms, some really beautiful videos actually, and some are kind of more amateurish videos of interviews and so on. So all are helpful to some degree. And then I have a blog on Psychology Today. I try to blog about once a week. If you wanted to check that out, you can track kind of more of a story-driven, with research and practical tips on character strengths. So now we can actually open up the line for questions. Megan, you can guide me at how much time we want to spend with this. My time is completely flexible, so as much time as you want, I'll allow you to be the guide.
Yeah, so we're already over time in terms of the presentation. So here's what I'm going to suggest we do is I'm actually going to bring us to the end and then take questions, Ryan, because we're already over. I want to make sure that we honor time. So
sure.
we'll finish out, and then we'll end this session. But we will stay live to answer a few of the questions, and those that don't get answered, we'll go ahead and put on the virtual classroom.
Sounds great.
So can I continue with the slides, Ryan? Is that okay to end this?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yep.
Okay. Oops, sorry. We both pressed the button at the same time. So here's Ryan's specific email address to follow up with today. So feel free to email Ryan as he graciously put forth to you to ask him questions directly. I also want to say that we're going to be putting the questions on the virtual classroom as well. So next up in the virtual conference session is the coaching one. And this is Coaching for a Positive Change, Building on Strengths, Stories, and Success with Linda Wallace. So put this date on your calendar if it's not there already, and we'll look forward to seeing you then live again. I also just want to make note of a couple of comments. I love to watch the chat box and listen to Ryan as we're going through. And there was a couple of themes. First of all, no worries. All of the material is on the virtual classroom. You'll be able to get it. I did see about the comment on the educators, and actually Ryan and I will talk later because I do think that adding an education piece would be a wonderful addition to the classroom work. The slides will be uploaded at that point as well to the virtual classroom. Absolute pleasure being with you today. And I knew there was a couple of questions. This is the end of the formal presentation. I'm going to leave it open for about 10 more minutes for some questions. And we do have a hideout about 3:30. So with that, let me go back in time. And if we don't get to your question, you can put it in again because now some of the questions are kind of buried here. But one of them that I know that Gabby from Switzerland was asking was, Ryan, are these in different languages, the VIA reports? We obviously have people from all over the world.
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, the VIA survey, for those that don't know this, is translated and available in over 20 languages. If you go to our site, you can see them all, and many are in progress, like Polish has just happened, and Greek has just happened, and many of the VIA youth surveys also are translated, like the Dutch version was just translated, and so on. Now, in terms of the reports, there's not many languages where that's been translated, like not German, as this person was asking. I believe Brazilian Portuguese is actually one of them, and there are a couple of Asian languages in which the VIA Pro report is going to be available in at some point. So just a couple at this point, but we're hoping to make more and more of those available. Actually, Danish is another one where the VIA Pro report is translated. So more in progress.
One step at a time, because it's a lot of work to do those translations, I know. Yeah. I actually saw this question a couple of times, Ryan. I know you were busy presenting, so let me kind of go through what I saw was a repeated question. With the strengths you were pointing out to ferret out the top signature strength, is that important, or could it be both? Could it be an and scenario? How important it is to say what is the main signature strength? Do we have to put them head to head for someone to figure that out?
I'm not sure I completely understood the question. So, I was kind of hearing two different pieces. One is I thought the question was, what's most important to do with strengths work, whether it's signature or lower strengths? Is that what the question was?
At one point in your presentation, you were talking about if someone has a number of strengths that are highly rated. In other words, they're very close, they're very top in the graph, and you were trying to help the client pick out their signature strength out of those top strengths. And you were saying, have the client go to head, almost say, well, which is more important? Why is it important to say this is the top and you focus on this one?
Right. Yeah, right. The head-to-head is really just kind of one example, something I found useful, just more of a practical tip, but not something that's crucial to do. I suggest that because many people in this work really end up wanting to have a really finite number of strengths to work on with the client, or often the clients really want a finite number, and then they start to really get tension around, well, is it this strength or is it this strength? And so that's when I was saying, well, why don't you just frame it as a question for the client to be able to look at the two head to head and see which one might be more relevant. Of course, it could be that both are relevant, or maybe both of them aren't core to who the person is. But really, it's just a starting point, another question the person could ask.
And what I like about this is this gets into the explore stage of your model, that by doing this, you're exploring more deeply. You're not just aware of it, but you're exploring the interaction between those.
Right, yeah.
So, Kathleen, I hope that answered your question. Another that had that. Do you see other there that you would like to address, Ryan, or would you like me to pick some out for you?
Keep looking. Let's see. I saw somewhere around a question around, I can't find it now, around the difference between the VIA strengths and the Gallup Strengths Finder talent. I know that's a common one anyway that people often ask, but so there are some key differences between the VIA survey, which measures character strengths, and the Gallup Strengths Finder measure, which actually measures something a bit different. What's actually being measured by the Gallup Strengths Finder, even though the word strengths is used, what they're really looking at is talents and skills. It's some amalgamation of talents and skills in the workplace, also somewhat in schools, but mostly the workplace is where their work has focused. And so it's a different definition of strengths to begin with, that we think of character strengths as the core of who you are, versus what the way Gallup frames it, which is what you do well in the workplace. And another key difference is that the VIA work is actually peer-reviewed science. So Gallup is a classification of strengths that they came up with based on their survey research, and is really not that different from a number of other organizations that have done the same thing. I mean, I could point to at least 2 other organizations that have strengths or competencies that they focus on. There's a group that focuses on 16 competencies that they call strengths. So, and these are for-profit organizations that have their research all proprietary, and it's usually done by internal scientists into their organization to kind of promote their for-profit mission, which might be a very good mission. So that's very different than the VIA Institute and the VIA character work, which is research it's open for anybody. Any scientist in the world can study the VIA survey, can use it in their work, and it's published in peer-reviewed journals. So if anybody goes to a library anywhere in the world, or a virtual library, and does a search on strengths and character strengths or talent strengths, you'll find almost nothing in the scientific literature from Gallup or from those other organizations, because again, that research is proprietary. Other people can't use it and study it and try to see whether it's good or not or how to advance it. It's just for that organization to just advance it themselves. Whereas the VIA character strengths, you'll find literally hundreds of scientific studies that people have done from around the world looking at character. So it's a big difference. Sometimes people don't get that peer-reviewed versus non-peer-reviewed distinction. So that's a difference. The definition is different. The way that they're used is different. Character is who we are, so we use it across all domains, at work and school, family, for fun, social. The Gallup strengths, again, are more specific to school and to work. So some differences, sometimes people use both together, and they look at how can my VIA strengths improve my Gallup talent. And so sometimes that's a useful approach that some consultants take. So, yeah, so they can work together as well.
Thank you, Ryan. And there was a couple of questions about the actual responses. In other words, what's the largest differentiation you've seen about the top strength and the lowest strength? What's the biggest difference you've seen? And do you read into, like, there was one question about the graph that you showed a number of character strengths towards the top, where someone else might see only 4 with a whole lot of other ones that aren't in their character strength area. How do you account for those differentials?
Yeah. Well, yeah, first of all, I mean, I've seen just a wide range of profiles where sometimes people's strengths, there is a large difference where they have some strengths up in the 5, which is the highest you can have, a raw score of 5, and some are more closer to 1. Other people's profiles are really clustered in. Everything is above 4.5. So it's kind of, I don't know if there's any average in terms of that.
There is no normal.
Yeah, no exact normal. We just, individualize it to each person and try not to get at the whole broad brushstrokes thing, not get too much into some of those numbers and those details. What's again more important is just exploring the client's strengths or the group's strengths. Now, one thing that has come about in terms of those kind of numbers is people that tend to have higher total raw score, so more strengths that are higher overall, those people tend to have higher well-being, higher happiness. So that is one finding. But I still don't make too much of that, because it doesn't mean that if you don't have a whole lot of strengths above, say, 4, that you're not happy. But it's a starting point. It tells us something about how people see themselves and their character.
Interesting. Thank you.
Sure. Another question that I see here and that has comes up all the time is around do the strengths change? And people will often say, oh, it looks like my strengths are changing a lot. When I take it a couple of times. And so the first statement to make is that the VIA survey is reliable over time, so that it meets the criteria for being a reliable test. So it's repeatable. You'll get similar results over time. And the best way, the most clear way to explain that, I think, is to say that the highest strengths that you have aren't going to become your bottom strength. So your top 5 or top 7 top strengths aren't going to become your bottom 7, or vice versa. But what does happen sometimes is you take it over a period of time that the strengths shuffle around a little bit. One strength might jet up into the top 7, another one might fall down into the bottom 7. And whenever people share that with me, I always say, well, that's really interesting to notice. And what might have accounted for that? Is there certain things going on in your life or certain changes going on? Or for some people, they really focus hard on a particular strength and they improve it. But another thing to kind of remember, it's sort of a technicality, is that when strengths are tied in the VIA survey, you still have to get a rank order. And so if there's a tie, the ties are broken randomly. So theoretically, I could answer all the questions the exact same way one year and then the next year. And because ties are broken randomly, say the person's number 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all tied at 4.3, those could rotate around and float around even though you answer the questions identical because of that random tiebreak aspect. So you really need to look at the raw scores. And whenever I do that, because people will often, and I encourage anyone to do this if they're questioning their results, we can look at your raw scores from test 1 and test 2 and really see if there's really big changes. I mean, did your strengths really go from 4.5 to 3.5? And did your creativity really go from 2.7 to 5.0? And almost always, it's like, oh my goodness, the parallel is kind of uncanny. Like if you look at the pattern overall, that it's really people still, their top 7 are basically their top 7. And, and their bottom 10 are basically all kind of around that bottom. So that's where when we say the reliability piece.
Yeah, that's good. I'm smiling as you're talking because I'm seeing this last comment that we're going to end today's session with is from Lori, who said, got her zest jumped, and I attribute that to WBI. Thank you, Lori. We're glad we could help in the jump into the zest area. Ryan, I really, really want to thank you. I know there are more questions, and honestly, I feel like we could just continue this conversation with just a question and answer for probably another hour at least. But for now, I want to thank Ryan very deeply for his work in putting this together and his expertise in sharing with us all and his willingness to share the free report. And all that information will be in an email to you on how to access it. Also, I want to very much thank you, the listeners, the participants. I noticed how you helped one another in the chat group. I love that. And just having you here raised my level of well-being for today. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ryan. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.